Billionaire enters restaurant in disguise and catches Waitress, feeding her wheelchair-bound son. What he saw in that moment changed his life forever. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The rain was punishing New York City that July night, transforming the streets of the old downtown into small rivers that snaked between worn cobblestones. At Sunrise Cafe, the last cups clinked in the sink, while Emily Reynolds organized the space before closing. The persistent aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of rain entering through the cracks in the back door, bringing memories of a life she was trying to leave behind. The cafe had been her refuge for almost 2 years, since everything changed. The peeling walls held stories of generations, and each scratched table carried memories of meetings, farewells, and new beginnings. There, among regular customers and the daily ritual of preparing coffee, Emily found a bit of peace, even if her mind occasionally wandered to memories she preferred to forget. "Good night, Martha." She said goodbye to the cook, who was leaving in a hurry, protecting herself from the rain with a folded newspaper. Emily was left alone, as always happened on closing nights. She liked this moment, when she could organize everything at her own pace without rushing, leaving each object exactly where it should be for the next day. While cleaning the marble counter, her reflection in the antique mirror on the wall caught her attention. Dark hair tied in a messy bun, subtle dark circles that not even concealer could completely disguise. The simple cafe uniform, an image so different from the young woman full of dreams she once was, but there was no time to dive into melancholy. Life continued its course, and she had learned to accept her new path. The sound of rain intensified, and a flash of lightning briefly illuminated the cafe's interior, followed by the rumble of thunder. Emily shuddered, not from the shock, but from the sudden memory of another stormy night long ago when everything still made sense. She shook her head, pushing away the memories, and focused on finishing her tasks. That's when she heard it. A different sound, almost imperceptible amid the storm. Something between a sob and a moan coming from the alley behind the cafe. Her first instinct was to ignore it. New York had its dangers, especially at night. But that sound had something particular about it, something that touched a sensitive chord in her heart. She cautiously approached the back door, firmly holding the broom as a precaution. Through the fogged glass, she distinguished a small form, a silhouette that shouldn't be there at that hour of the night. Her heart raced, divided between prudence and an inexplicable impulse to help. "Is anyone there?" she asked, intertwining, her fingers on the cold doorknob. Silence was her only response, but now she could see more clearly. It was a wheelchair, and in it, a child. A boy who couldn't be more than 10 years old, soaked to the bone, trembling from cold and fear. His eyes, when they met Emily's, carried a mixture of terror and plea that she knew all too well. Without thinking twice, Emily opened the door. The cold wind and rain invaded the cafe, but she didn't care. She approached the boy carefully, like someone approaching an injured bird. "It's okay," she said softly, crouching to be at eye level with him. "I can help. Would you like to come in? It's very cold out here." The boy remained silent, but his trembling was visible. Emily noticed that his hands were gripping the arms of the wheelchair tightly, knuckles white with tension. There was something in that scene that awakened in her a long-dormant instinct, a desire to protect that she thought she had lost forever. "My name is Emily," she continued, keeping her voice calm and gentle. "This is Sunrise Cafe. We can make some hot chocolate, how about that? I also have some cookies that just came out of the oven." A new lightning bolt cut the sky, and the boy flinched. It was at that moment that Emily saw, reflected in the door, glass, a black SUV parked across the street. Through the windshield, she distinguished the silhouette of a man watching the scene with intensity. Something in his posture suggested more than simple curiosity. The cozy interior of Sunrise Cafe contrasted dramatically with the storm raging outside. Emily had managed to convince the boy to come in, and now he was sitting near the counter, wrapped in a soft blanket she kept for colder days. His soaked clothes had been replaced by a clean t-shirt that Martha kept at the cafe for emergencies. Too big for him, but dry and comfortable. "Here you go," said Emily, placing a steaming mug of hot chocolate before him. The sweet, comforting aroma filled the room, competing with the residual scent of coffee. "Be careful, it's very hot." The boy looked at the drink with a mixture of distrust and desire. His fingers, still a bit shaky, touched the side of the mug, feeling the comforting warmth. Emily noticed that, despite the wet clothes and the state in which she found him, there was a subtle elegance in his gestures, as if he had been raised in a refined environment. "Do you have a name?" she asked gently, sitting on a small stool nearby, keeping a respectful distance so as not to intimidate him. "Leo," he answered, almost in a whisper, his voice hoarse as if it hadn't been used in a long time. It was the first word he had spoken since she found him. "It's nice to meet you, Leo," Emily smiled. "Want to tell me what you were doing alone in the rain?" Leo lowered his eyes to the mug, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation forming on the exterior. I ran away," he admitted after a long moment. "Ran away from where?" "From home," he replied, and there was a note of determination in his voice that surprised Emily. "My dad. He's never there, and when he is, it's like I don't exist." Emily felt her heart tighten. She knew all too well the weight of loneliness, especially when you're too young to fully understand it. Before she could respond, the cafe door opened with a bang, bringing in a gust of cold wind and rain. A tall man, wearing an impeccable dark suit, now partially wet, entered the establishment. His eyes, intensely blue and penetrating, swept the room until they found Leo. Emily recognized him as the man from the SUV. "Leo," his voice carried a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Have you any idea how scared I was?" The boy visibly shrank in the chair, his hands gripping the mug tighter. Emily stood up, instinctively positioning herself between father and son. "Mr. Donovan," Leo murmured, and there was a tremor in his voice that had nothing to do with the cold. "Good evening," Emily intervened, her voice firm but polite. "I believe you're Leo's father?" The man seemed to notice her for the first time. His eyes studied her with disconcerting intensity, as if trying to determine what kind of threat she represented. "Victor Donovan," he introduced himself dryly. "And yes, I'm Leo's father. Thank you for sheltering him, but we need to go now." Emily sensed the growing tension in the room. Leo was holding the mug as if it were a shield, and there was something in Victor's rigid posture that suggested more than simple paternal concern. "Perhaps," she suggested carefully, "we could let Leo finish his hot chocolate. He was quite frightened when I found him, and—" "I don't need advice on how to care for my son, miss," Victor interrupted her, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow of uncertainty perhaps, that contradicted the harshness of his words. It was then that something unexpected happened. Leo, who had been silent until then, brought the mug to his lips and took a sip of the chocolate. A small sound of satisfaction escaped his throat, and for the first time that night, a shy smile illuminated his face. Victor froze. Emily realized that something important was happening, something beyond her immediate understanding. The businessman was looking at his son as if seeing him for the first time, and there was a vulnerability in his expression that didn't match his previous authoritative posture. It's been a while since I've seen him smile like that," murmured Victor, more to himself than to Emily. The next morning dawned with a timid sun that barely managed to pierce the persistent fog. Emily arrived earlier at Sunrise Cafe, her hands still slightly trembling as she remembered the events of the previous night. While she was organizing the tables for another day of work, her mind wandered to Leo's smile and Victor Donovan's troubled look. The doorbell rang, announcing the first customer of the day. Emily looked up and felt her heart skip. Victor Donovan was standing at the entrance without the suit from the night before, but still imposing in his cashmere sweater and impeccably pressed dress pants. "Miss Reynolds," he greeted her, pronouncing her surname. "Can we talk?" Emily nodded, indicating a more private table near the window. The businessman sat down with studied elegance, his fingers drumming softly on the old wooden surface. "First of all, I must apologize for my behavior yesterday," he began, surprising her. "I was worried about Leo, but that doesn't justify my rudeness." "There's no need for apologies," replied Emily, automatically serving him a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Any parent would be distressed in such a situation. Victor observed the dark liquid for a moment, as if seeking the right words. "You have experience with children, don't you? I noticed by the way you handled Leo." The question hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. Images she tried to keep locked burst into her mind. Childish laughter, small hands seeking hers, a responsibility she carried with love until that fateful day. "I did," she answered simply, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in her voice. "Leo, he's not an easy child," continued Victor, his eyes finally meeting hers. "Since the accident, he's completely shut down. He doesn't smile, barely speaks, refuses to participate in school activities. The best specialists in New York haven't been able to reach him." Emily remained silent, sensing there was more to come. "But yesterday he smiled. For the first time in months he showed a genuine emotion, and it was because of you." "Mr. Donovan, Victor, please." "Victor," she corrected, "sometimes all a child needs is to feel truly seen." Something passed through his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "That's exactly why I'm here," he said, leaning slightly forward. "I want to make you a proposal." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was an intensity in his look that made her uncomfortable. "I need someone who can help Leo reconnect with the world," explained Victor. "Not as a therapist or teacher. He already has more than enough professionals for that. I need someone who can see beyond the barriers he's built. Someone who has already demonstrated having that natural gift." "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering an opportunity," he corrected. "For Leo, for you, and I admit for myself. You would work directly at Donovan Corp, with an official position in the corporate social responsibility area. But your true function would be to be present in Leo's life, to help him rediscover the joy he lost." Emily felt the world spin. The proposal was tempting. More than tempting, it was almost unreal. But fear, that old companion, whispered in her ear, reminding her of the past, of the consequences of caring too much. I can't," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "There are things about me that you don't know." Victor smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know more than you imagine, Miss Reynolds, including about the incident that drove you away from your former profession." Emily's blood ran cold. How could he know? "I have resources," he continued, as if reading her thoughts, "and unlike what the justice system decided, I don't believe you were responsible for that tragedy. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't control everything." There was something in his voice, a note of personal understanding, that made Emily look up. For a brief moment, she saw beyond the facade of the successful businessman, saw a father struggling to win back his son, a man carrying his own ghosts. The Donovan Corp's building rose imposingly in the heart of New York's financial district, its glass walls reflecting the sky like a giant mirror. Emily walked through the revolving doors feeling completely out of place in her new blazer, a last-minute purchase to look more corporate. A week had passed since the conversation with Victor at Sunrise Cafe, and after much reflection, she had accepted the proposal. Now, observing the employees in their impeccable suits and high heels, she questioned whether she had made the right decision. "Miss Reynolds?" A voice pulled her from her thoughts. A tall, elegant man with marked features approached. "I'm Thomas Davis, Mr. Donovan's personal assistant. Welcome to Donovan Corp." There was something in Thomas's smile that didn't seem completely sincere, but Emily dismissed this impression, attributing it to her own nerves. He led her through mirrored corridors and spacious rooms, explaining procedures and introducing her to people whose names she knew she wouldn't be able to remember. "Your office will be on the same floor as Mr. Donovan's," explained Thomas, his voice carrying an almost imperceptible note of disapproval. "A privileged location." Emily noticed the curious looks that followed her. Certainly rumors were already circulating. Who was she? Why had a simple waitress been placed in such a close position to the CEO? "Leo is waiting for you," announced. Thomas, stopping in front of a frosted glass door. "Mr. Donovan thought it better for you to have some time together before he joins you." The room was different from the rest of the building. While the other environments were all clean and minimalist, this one had been decorated with Leo in mind. There was a small library, educational games, a drawing table adapted for his wheelchair, and, surprisingly, a small vertical garden on one of the walls. Leo was there observing the city through the panoramic window. When Emily entered, he slightly turned his head, a small smile appearing on his lips as he recognized her. "Hello, Leo," she greeted softly, approaching. "I really like your space here." "Dad had it made," he replied, his voice still shy but firmer than on the night of the storm. "But I never use it. I prefer to look outside." Emily approached the window, observing the view with him. "What do you see when you look at the city?" Leo was silent for a moment, thoughtful. "I see people in a hurry, always in a hurry, like Dad." There was a profound sadness in that observation that broke Emily's heart. She pulled up a chair and sat beside him, at the same level as his eyes. "You know what I see?" she asked, pointing to an old building surrounded by skyscrapers. "I see stories. That building there, for example. In the midst of all this modernity, it resists, keeping memories of another era, like sunrise." "Cafe." Leo's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Do you think it has stories to tell?" "I'm sure it does. How about we find out together?" That's how it began. With a simple conversation about architecture, Emily found a breach in the wall that Leo had built around himself. In the following hours, they created a game imagining the stories behind each building they could see, each person passing on the streets below. Victor found them like this, absorbed in their game, Leo gesturing animatedly while inventing an elaborate story about an Art Deco building nearby. The businessman stopped at the door, not wanting to interrupt the moment, observing with a mixture of surprise and emotion his son who, for the first time in a long time, seemed truly alive. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. Outside the room, Thomas observed the scene with calculating eyes, his cell phone discreetly recording every detail. On his screen, a message awaited response. "Keep us informed about the new employee. We need to know everything about Emily Reynolds." The weeks turned into months, and Emily found her rhythm at Donovan Corp. Her mornings were dedicated to meetings about social projects, many of which she helped to reformulate with a more humane perspective. The afternoons belonged to Leo, in sessions that mixed studies, games, and long conversations about everything and nothing. On that particular afternoon, something was different. Leo seemed more introspective than usual, his fingers nervously playing with a pencil while trying to concentrate on the history lesson. "Is everything okay?" asked Emily, noticing his restlessness. "Today, it's been a year," he replied, his voice low. "1 year since the accident." Emily felt her heart tighten. In all these months, neither Leo nor Victor had directly mentioned the accident that had left the boy in a wheelchair. It was a subject that hung over them like a dark cloud, always present but never acknowledged. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" she asked softly, without pressuring. Leo put down the pencil, his eyes fixed on the window. "I wanted to prove that I could do things on my own. Dad had promised to take me to school that day, but he cancelled at the last minute. An important meeting, he said. Always important meetings." His voice trembled slightly, but he continued. "So I decided to go alone. It wasn't that far, and I was already 10 years old. I thought I could do it. But it was raining. The bus skidded. Around the curve, Emily fought against the impulse to hug him, respecting his space as he finally shared his pain. Dad arrived at the hospital hours later. He was in Paris, in a video conference with investors. When I woke up, and the doctors said I would never walk again, he promised he would change, that he would be different. That's why we moved to New York to start over, but nothing really changed. He still lives for the company." In the hallway, Victor Donovan had stopped silently at the door, listening to his son's words. His hand was gripping the doorknob so tightly that his knuckles were white, his face a mask of contained pain. "You know what's worse?" continued Leo, tears now freely running down his face. "Sometimes I think he feels guilty, and that's why he tries to compensate with things. This room, the doctors, the private tutors, but never with time, never with presence. Your father cares about you, Leo, said Emily gently. Sometimes adults also get lost. They also don't know how to fix things. How do you manage? How do I manage what? To make it seem like everything's okay even when it's not, he replied, his eyes meeting hers. I know you also carry something sad. I see it in your eyes sometimes when you think no one's looking. The observation caught Emily off guard. How could a child see so clearly through the mask she had perfected over the years? You're right, she admitted after a moment. We all carry our stories, our pains. But you know what I've learned? That we don't need to carry everything alone. Outside the room, Victor leaned his forehead against the cold wall, his own words from years ago echoing in his mind. Just one more meeting, son. I promise I'll be there tomorrow. How many broken promises, how many lost moments. Inside a room, Leo picked up his drawing pad, an activity he had rediscovered with Emily's help. Can I draw you? He asked shyly. Of course, she smiled, sitting in a comfortable position. But only if you let me draw you afterwards. While Leo concentrated on his drawing, Emily noticed a movement at the door. For a brief moment, her eyes met Victor's, and in that look, they shared a mutual understanding. Both knew the weight, though of carrying regrets, of living with the consequences of choices that couldn't be undone. At the other end of the hallway, Thomas observed the scene with growing interest, his mind calculating possibilities. In his folder, a dossier on Emily grew, thicker each day, every detail of her past carefully documented, including those she preferred to forget. A fine drizzle was falling on New York when Emily left the Donovan Corp building that night. Her mind was still on the conversation with Leo, on the painful truths that had been shared. So distracted was she that she didn't notice the man standing near the entrance until she almost bumped into him. Careful! He held her by the shoulders, preventing her from falling. His eyes were an intense green, and his smile had something familiar that Emily couldn't quite identify. I'm sorry, she composed herself, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. I was distracted. Don't worry, he replied, his accent much softer than Victor's. I'm Adam Mitchell, journalist. Actually, I was waiting for you. Emily took a step back, instantly alert. For me? You don't need to be worried. He raised his hands in a reassuring gesture. I'm doing a story on corporate social responsibility. Programs and the work you're developing at Donovan Corp caught my attention. There was something in the way he spoke, an intensity beneath the charming surface that made Emily hesitate. I'm sorry, but I'm not authorized to give interviews. You would need to speak with our communications department. What if I told you my interest goes beyond the professional? Adam stepped forward, lowering his voice. What if I told you I know about your past, about the incident at the childcare center? Emily's blood ran cold. How? I'm not your enemy, Emily, he interrupted her softly. In fact, I think we can help each other. How about coffee? I promise you'll want to hear what I have to say. Something in the way he pronounced coffee made Emily think of Sunrise Cafe, of the comfort of its old walls and the familiar aroma that always calmed her. All right, she agreed after a moment of hesitation. But I know a better place than the downtown coffee shops. Sunrise Cafe was quiet at that hour, only a few regular customers occupying their usual tables. Martha smiled when she saw Emily enter, but her smile faltered slightly when she noticed Adam. So this is where it all began, he commented, observing the environment with interest. The meeting with Leo, Victor's proposal. How do you know so much about me? Emily interrupted him, her voice firm despite the nervousness she felt. Adam took a sip of his coffee, savoring the moment. Let's say I have a personal interest in the Donovan family, especially in Victor. Why? Because, he hesitated for a moment, his eyes fixed on the cup. Victor Donovan is my father. The revelation hit Emily like an electric shock. Now she understood why something about Adam seemed familiar to her. There were traces of Victor in his face, in the way he gestured. Leo, she began. Is my half-brother, yes, completed Adam, although he doesn't know that. No one knows, actually. Victor did an excellent job keeping me in the shadows all these years. There was bitterness in his voice, an old pain that echoed Leo's. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're different," he replied, leaning forward. "I've seen how you care about Leo, how you're really trying to help him. You're not like the other Donovan employees who only get close out of self-interest." "And you? What's your interest?" Adam's smile faltered for a moment. "Justice, maybe, recognition, or maybe I just want my father to feel a bit of the abandonment he made me feel all these years." "Using Leo as a weapon?" questioned Emily, her voice hardening. "He's already suffered enough." "No," Adam shook his head. "That's not what I want. Actually, I came to warn you. There are people inside Donovan Corp who don't like your presence, who see you as a threat. Thomas has been gathering information about your past." Emily felt her stomach sink. "Why?" "Because you're changing things. Victor has been different since you arrived. More present, less focused just on business. That bothers a lot of people." Outside, the cafe night was beginning to fall over New York. Through the window, Emily observed the city lights turning on one by one, like stars appearing in an urban sky. Each one holding its own stories, its own secrets. The revelation of Adam's identity haunted Emily in the days that followed. During her daily activities at Donovan Corp, she began to notice small details that previously went unnoticed. Thomas's lingering looks, conversations. That ceased when she approached, the way some executives observed her with barely disguised distrust. On a particularly busy afternoon, while organizing documents in her office, Emily found a folder she didn't recognize. Inside it, old photographs caught her attention. A young, elegant woman with delicate features holding a baby. On the back of the photo, a date and a name. Mary Claire and Adam, 1990. "These photos shouldn't be here," Victor's voice startled her. He was standing at the door, his face a mask of contained emotions. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," Emily began, but something in his expression made her stop. There was a vulnerability there that she had never seen before. Victor entered the room, softly closing the door behind him. He picked up one of the photos, his fingers tracing the contours of the image with surprising gentleness. "Mary Claire was my first love," he said, his voice low. "We were young, impetuous, full of dreams. But I was beginning to build what would become Donovan Corp, and she wanted a different life." "Adam," Emily murmured, the pieces falling into place. Victor's gaze rose abruptly. "How you met him?" It wasn't a question. Emily nodded, deciding that honesty was the best path. "He sought me out a few days ago." Victor sat heavily in one of the chairs, suddenly looking older and more tired. "Of course he did. He has every right to be resentful. I failed him just as I've been failing Leo." "It's never too late to fix things," Emily said softly. "It's not that simple," Victor shook his head. "There are complications. The board, the shareholders, the company's image. And since when is their opinion more important than your children's happiness?" Emily's words hung in the air like a challenge. Victor stared at her, surprised by her boldness, but there was no censure in his gaze, only a deep melancholy. "Do you know why I chose you to work here?" he asked, apparently changing the subject. "It wasn't just because of how you handled Leo that night. It was because I saw in your eyes the same pain I carry, the pain of someone who lost something precious because of their own choices." Emily felt her throat tighten. "The incident at the childcare center—" "It wasn't your fault," Victor firmly interrupted her. "Just as it wasn't Leo's fault for going out alone that day. We, adults, are the ones who failed to protect them." A heavy silence settled between them, loaded with untold truths and shared regrets. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink, the shadows of the buildings stretching like dark fingers over the city. "Victor," Emily hesitated, carefully choosing her words, "there's something you need to know. Thomas—" Before she could continue, the door opened abruptly. It was Leo, his face lit with an animation he hadn't shown in a long time. "Dad?" "Em!" he exclaimed, maneuvering his chair into the room. "Look what I drew." In his hands, a colorful drawing showed three figures: a dark-haired woman, a tall man in a suit, and between them a boy in a wheelchair, all smiling, all together. At the top of the page, in large, slightly crooked letters, "My family." Victor took the drawing with trembling hands, his eyes meeting Emily's over his son's head. In that moment, something changed between them. A silent understanding, a recognition of what was at stake. Outside the room, Thomas observed the scene through the half-open door, his cell phone discreetly photographing the intimate moment. On his screen, a message flashed. "Complete report on Emily Reynolds ready for disclosure. Awaiting your authorization." Sunrise Cafe was especially busy that Saturday morning. Emily had convinced Victor to bring Leo to get to know the place during the day, arguing that the boy needed experiences outside the corporate environment. To her surprise, Victor not only agreed, but decided to join the outing. "This place has soul," commented Victor, observing the peeling walls with a new look, different from the modern cafes in the business center. "That's why I love working here," replied Martha, who made a point of personally serving their table. "Every crack tells a story, every table has its memories." Leo absorbed everything with fascination, his eyes shining as he explored every detail of the environment. His drawing pad was open on the table, his agile fingers capturing the atmosphere of the place in quick, precise strokes. "Look, Dad," he exclaimed, pointing to an old photograph on the wall. "Is that the cafe when it was new?" Victor leaned over to better see the yellowed image. "Must be from the 1940s, he commented, genuinely interested. "The architecture is typical of that. Hira." "Actually," a familiar voice interrupted, "it's from 1938. The cafe was founded by Italian immigrants who fled the war." Adam was standing at the table, an enigmatic smile on his lips. Victor's face visibly paled while Leo looked curiously at the newcomer. "Adam," Victor slowly stood up, his voice tense. "What are you doing here?" "It's a public place, isn't it?" replied Adam, pulling up a chair and sitting down without being invited. "Besides, I heard they serve the best coffee in New York." Emily observed the scene with growing apprehension, noticing how the similar features between father and son became even more evident when they were close. Leo, although confused by the sudden tension, also seemed to notice something familiar about the stranger. "You're a journalist, aren't you?" asked Leo innocently. "I saw your photo in a magazine." "I am," Adam smiled, a genuinely affectionate smile. "And you must be Leo. Your drawings are impressive." Victor remained standing, his hands gripping the back of the chair with force. "Emily, please take Leo to see the cafe's kitchen. I'm sure Martha would be happy to show him how she makes those cookies he likes so much." But before they could move, Thomas appeared at the cafe entrance, his normally impassive face showing unusual urgency. "Mr. Donovan," he called, approaching quickly, "we need your immediate presence at the company. There has been a leak of sensitive information." Thomas's look lingered for a moment on Emily, a silent accusation in his eyes. Adam noticed the gesture and stood up abruptly. "What an interesting coincidence," he commented, his voice loaded with irony, "just when we were beginning such a promising conversation." "This has nothing to do with you," Thomas replied dryly. "No?" Adam raised an eyebrow. "Then why did I receive just a few minutes ago a complete dossier on a certain Donovan Corpton employee? A dossier that, curiously, seems to have been compiled under your supervision, Thomas." The silence that followed was deafening. Leo looked from one adult to another, his confused expression transforming into concern. Victor seemed to be waging an internal battle, his eyes alternating between Adam and Thomas. "Dad?" Leo's voice trembled slightly. "What's going on?" It was that innocent question that seemed to awaken Victor from his internal conflict. His face hardened, a decision being made. "Thomas, you're going to explain to me exactly what's going on." His voice was icy. "And as for you, Adam, I think it's high time we had an honest conversation. 17 years overdue, I'd say," replied Adam, a challenging gleam in his green eyes, the same eyes as Mary Claire in the old photographs. The atmosphere at Sunrise Cafe had completely changed. The welcoming environment of minutes ago had given way to a palpable tension that seemed to electrify the air. Martha, sensing the situation, began discreetly to move other customers away from nearby tables. Emily remained at Leo's side, a protective hand on his shoulder, as she observed the confrontation unfolding. Years of secrets, lies, and unacknowledged pain were about to come to light, and she knew that nothing would be the same after that day. Sunrise Cafe had been emptied thanks to Martha's discretion. Only the 5 people remained: Victor, Adam, Emily, Leo, and Thomas, each carrying their own weight of untold truths. "Before anything else," Victor began, his voice controlled, "I want to see this dossier you mentioned, Adam." Adam took his tablet and slid it across the table. On the screen, a detailed document about Emily opened, including information that she herself had tried to forget. Old photos, medical records, testimonies from the judicial process, her life exposed in cruel detail. Victor turned to Thomas, who maintained a rigid but visibly uncomfortable posture. "Sir, I was only following orders to protect the company's interests," Thomas tried to justify himself. "Miss Reynolds had access to sensitive information, and her background does—" "My background," Emily interrupted, her voice trembling with indignation. "You investigated my entire life to discredit me? Why?" "Because you were changing things," Adam answered in Thomas's place. "Changing Victor, changing the company, changing Leo. And some people don't want changes, right, Thomas?" Leo, who had remained silent, observing everything with attentive eyes, suddenly spoke. "You look like the photo Dad keeps in his drawer." The innocent comment fell like a bomb in the tense environment. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking strength. "Yes, Leo," he finally answered. Adam is your brother." The silence that followed was deafening. Leo looked from Victor to Adam, his wide eyes processing the information. "Why did you never tell me?" asked the boy, his voice small but firm. "Because your father is an expert at hiding what bothers him," Adam replied bitterly, "just as he hid my mother in France with a generous pension to keep the silence." "It wasn't like that," Victor banged on the table, his composure finally breaking. "Mary Claire chose to leave. She didn't want me to abandon my business dreams, didn't want the life I could offer at the time. And you let her go," Adam accused, "just as you let so many other important things slip away, like that meeting on the day of Leo's accident." Victor paled. Leo gripped the arms of his chair tightly, and Emily instinctively moved closer to him, protective. "Enough!" Martha's voice cut through the air like a whip. No one had noticed her approach. "You're hurting the boy, look at him." Indeed, Leo was trembling, his eyes brimming with contained tears. But there was something else on his face, a determination, a strength that very much resembled that of his newly discovered brother. "I want to hear," he said firmly. "I want to know the whole truth." It was then that Thomas, who had been checking his phone, nervously cleared his throat. "Mr. Donovan, there's something else you need to know. The information leak, it's not just about Miss Reynolds." All eyes turned to him. Thomas continued, his voice trembling slightly. "Constantine Global made a hostile takeover offer. They have access to internal Donovan Corp documents that could only have been provided by someone from inside." "By you," Adam completed, a humorless smile on his lips. "You've been working for them how long, Thomas? Since you approached me with exclusive information about Donovan Corp?" Thomas's face contracted in a grimace of guilt. Victor, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes, sank into his chair. "Everything I built," he murmured. "No," Leo interrupted surprisingly. "It's not everything you built, Dad. It's everything that prevented us from being a real family." The comment, coming from a child that everyone underestimated, hit Victor like a punch to the stomach. He looked at his 2 sons, one he had tried to keep at a distance and another he had almost lost through his misguided choices. The afternoon sun entered through the windows of Sunrise Cafe, creating golden patterns on the old walls. Martha had served a new round of coffee for everyone, including a special hot chocolate for Leo. The familiar aroma seemed to calm the spirits, bringing a momentary truce to the tension. "You're right, Leo." Victor finally broke the silence, his voice loaded with contained emotion. I spent so much time building walls that I forgot to build bridges. Adam, who had been playing distractedly with his cup, looked up. Why did you never try to find me? After I grew up, after you established yourself? Fear, admitted Victor, the word seeming to cost him a lot. Fear of facing my mistakes, of not knowing how to be a father, of not being accepted. How do you think I felt? Adam's voice trembled slightly. Growing up knowing I had a father who preferred to pretend I didn't exist? Leo, surprising everyone again, maneuvered his chair to be between his father and his newly discovered brother. I was afraid too, he said. Afraid that Dad only stayed with me out of obligation after the accident. But Emily taught me that sometimes we need to say what we feel even when it hurts. Emily, who was watching the scene with a heavy heart, felt everyone's eyes turn to her. I just showed that we all carry pain, but also the capacity to heal. How did you heal your pain? Asked Victor softly. After the incident at the childcare center. Emily took a deep breath, feeling it was time to face her own ghosts. I didn't heal completely, but I learned that we can choose how our pain transforms us. It can make us build walls or build bridges. Thomas, who had remained silent, suddenly stood up. Mr. Donovan, I'll turn myself in to the authorities. Confess my involvement with Constantine Global. Sit down, Thomas, ordered. Victor, his voice surprisingly calm. You're going to tell us exactly what they know and what they're planning, and then we'll solve this together. Together? Thomas blinked, confused. Yes, together. Victor looked at his sons. It's time for Donovan Corp to become what it always should have been. A legacy of unity, not division. Adam frowned. What do you mean? I mean that maybe it's time to rethink everything. The company, its priorities, its management. Victor paused, looking at Emily. You showed Leo that there are other ways to see the world. You showed me too, although I took a while to realize it. Leo, who had picked up his drawing pad, began to sketch something with renewed energy. We can do like Sunrise Cafe, he exclaimed. A place where people feel at home, where stories meet. What are you talking about, son? Asked Victor, leaning over to see the drawing. Look. Leo turned the pad, showing a sketch of Sunrise Cafe transformed. In his childish but expressive lines, the cafe expanded, gained access ramps, living spaces, a library. It could be a company project, a place for people like me who need special help, but also for everyone who needs to feel welcomed. Emily felt tears in her eyes as she saw the drawing. It was more than a childish architectural project. It was a symbol of healing, of reconstruction. The boy has vision, commented Martha, who had approached to see the drawing, and has heart. He has his mother's heart, said Adam softly, surprising himself with the comment. Victor looked at his oldest son, years of regret in his eyes. Mary Claire always knew how to see beauty in simple things. That's what I loved about her before I lost myself in ambition. Hey, it's still not too late, said Leo, his voice full of hope. We can start over, all of us. The cafe doorbell jingled softly, as if in agreement. Outside, New York continued its frantic rhythm, but inside Sunrise Cafe, something was changing. Walls were beginning to fall, and bridges were beginning to be built. The week that followed the revelations at Sunrise Cafe was a whirlwind of changes at Donovan Corp. Victor, inspired by Leo's idea, called an extraordinary board meeting to present a revolutionary proposal: the transformation of Sunrise Cafe into an inclusive cultural center. What you're seeing, explained Victor, projecting Leo's drawings on a giant screen in the meeting room, is not just a social responsibility project. It's a new vision for our company. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, exchanging skeptical looks. In the corner of the room, Emily observed everything next to Leo, who had insisted on personally presenting his ideas. But Mr. Donovan, interrupted one, of the directors, the cafe's land is already destined for the new business complex, the contracts. Contracts can be remade, cut Victor with a firmness that surprised everyone. And as for the business complex, I have an alternative proposal. With a gesture, he called Adam, who was waiting outside. The murmur in the room increased when the journalist entered, his resemblance to Victor impossible to ignore. My son, Victor made a significant pause, has experience in cultural projects in France. He will help us develop something truly innovative. The word son fell like a bomb in the room. Some older executives who knew the story with Mary Claire visibly paled. The Sunrise Project, began Adam, his professional voice masking the emotion of the moment, will be a space where culture, accessibility, and social responsibility meet. Maintaining the cafe's historical structure, we will expand to create a complete cultural center. Leo, unable to contain his enthusiasm, maneuvered his chair forward. "Can I show?" he asked Adam, who nodded with a smile. With Emily's help, Leo began to explain his drawings. "Here we keep the cafe as it is, because its stories are important, but we add ramps and elevators so everyone can enter. On the second floor, a library with braille books and audiobooks. On the terrace, a sensory garden where people with different needs can experience nature." The boys' enthusiasm was contagious. Even the most resistant executives began to lean forward, interested. "In the back," continued Leo, pointing to another drawing, "a space for art and music workshops, and here an adapted amphitheater where we can have presentations and lectures." "And most importantly," completed Emily, noticing that Leo was beginning to tire, "the project includes a professional training program for young people with special needs and in situations of social vulnerability." Victor observed the interaction between his sons and Emily with a mixture of pride and regret. How had he been blind for so long to what really mattered? "The costs," began another director, but was interrupted by an unexpected voice. "The costs will be offset by the positive publicity and tax benefits." It was Thomas, speaking for the first time since his dual role had been revealed. "I did a complete analysis. The project is economically viable, especially if we consider the partnerships we can establish." Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised. Thomas continued, "As part of my redemption process, I spent the week studying similar cases. The potential is real." "Besides," added Adam, "I already have the commitment of 3 major French cultural foundations interested in participating in the project. My years of cultural journalism served for something." The tension in the room was palpable. The board members looked at each other, weighing the risks and benefits. That's when Leo did something unexpected. He began to distribute cups of coffee that Martha had specially prepared for the occasion. "This is the taste of change," he said, repeating a phrase he had heard Emily use. "Sunrise Cafe has always been more than a place to drink coffee. It's a place where people meet, where stories begin." The familiar and comforting aroma filled the room, bringing with it memories and possibilities. Victor observed the faces around the table soften, the skeptical expressions giving way to something more receptive. "Let's vote," he announced, his voice firm but gentle, "not just on a project, but on the future we want to build." The news of the Sunrise Project's approval spread quickly through Donovan Corp. In the corridors that were once cold and impersonal, a new type of energy circulated. Employees who barely greeted each other now stopped to discuss ideas for the project, share suggestions, offer help. In Emily's old office, now transformed into an improvised planning room, walls were covered with Leo's drawings and technical diagrams. She, Adam, and Victor worked together, each bringing their unique perspective to the project. "Mary Claire would love this," commented Adam one afternoon, watching Leo explain his latest ideas to a group of architects. "She always said that true wealth is in building bridges, not fortunes." Victor, who was bent over some blueprints, looked up. Is she well?" It was the first time he allowed himself to ask directly about his ex-companion. Adam hesitated for a moment, considering his response. "She is. She remarried, has a small art gallery in Provence," he replied softly. "But she never stopped talking. About you to me, about the good things mainly." "I was so young, so obstinate," Victor shook his head. "I thought success meant only one thing." "There's still time to redefine success," intervened Emily, who had silently approached. "That's what we're doing here, isn't it?" Leo called their attention with an excited exclamation. On his tablet, he showed a video he had created, a virtual presentation of the future Sunrise Cultural Center. with music and narration done by himself. "Son, this is amazing," exclaimed Victor, genuinely impressed. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Adam taught me," replied Leo, smiling at his brother. "He said that every modern journalist needs to know how to edit videos." The naturalness with which the brothers had grown close in recent weeks was touching. Despite the age difference and complex circumstances, there was an instant connection between them that not even years of separation could prevent. Called Leo, using the affectionate nickname he had created for Emily. "Can we show the video at the meeting with investors tomorrow?" Before she could respond, a commotion at the door caught everyone's attention. Martha had arrived, carrying an old box that looked heavy. "I found this while organizing the cafe's basement," she explained, placing the box on a table. "I thought you might be interested." Inside the box, dozens of old photographs of Sunrise Cafe and its surroundings told the story of the place through the decades. There were also newspaper clippings, old menus, and even a diary of the cafe's founder. "This is a historical treasure," exclaimed Adam, his journalistic instinct sharpened. "We can use this material to create a permanent exhibition in the new cultural center." Leo picked up one of the photos, which showed a child in a wheelchair being served by a smiling waiter. The date on the back indicated 1952. "Look!" he showed, excited. "The cafe has always been a special place for people like me." Victor approached his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. The gesture, once so rare between them, now seemed natural. "It's no coincidence that you found shelter here on that stormy night," he said softly. "Some places have the power to bring people together, to heal old wounds." Emily observed the scene with a full heart. In a few months she had witnessed and participated in a transformation that went far beyond a business project. It was a story of redemption, of second chances, of families reconnecting. "Do you know what else I found in the box?" Martha smiled, pulling out a yellowed envelope. "The original recipe for the hot chocolate I served Leo that night. It had been kept for 3 generations. "Can we make it now?" asked Leo, his eyes shining. "Of course, little one," replied Martha with affection. "In fact, I think we all need a break. Come, I'll teach you the secret." As they followed Martha to the improvised kitchen they had set up on the floor, Emily noticed how each of them had changed. Victor, once rigid and distant, now walked relaxed, a hand on each son's shoulder. Adam, who had arrived full of bitterness, smiled with genuine joy. And Leo, her dear Leo, was no longer the frightened boy from the night of the storm. The renovation works of Sunrise Cafe were about to begin when the first serious obstacle arose. During an apparently ordinary morning, Victor received a call that made his face pale. "What do you mean, embargo?" His voice echoed through the improvised meeting room. All the documents were in order. Emily, who was organizing the project, spreadsheets with Adam, looked up concerned. From the other side of the room, Leo stopped his work of cataloging the old photos, feeling the tension in the air. "It seems someone filed a lawsuit claiming the cafe is an uncatalogued historical heritage," Enos explained Victor after hanging up the phone. "The works can't begin until this is resolved." "Constantine Global?" asked Adam, his journalistic instinct alert. "Not directly," replied Victor, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But the law firm that filed the action has worked for them before." Martha, who had just entered with a tray of coffee, let out a heavy sigh. "This place has survived so much. Wars, crises, even a fire in 1963. It can't stop now." "And it won't." "Stop," declared Leo with surprising determination in his young voice. "We can use this to our advantage." Everyone turned to him, intrigued. Leo continued, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "If the cafe is indeed historical heritage, isn't that even better for our project? It means it's really special, that it needs to be preserved." Adam smiled, proud of his brother's insight. "He's right. Instead of fighting against the embargo, we can transform it into an opportunity." "How?" asked Victor, interested. "Let's document everything," replied Emily, catching on to the idea. "The old photos we found, the documents, the stories of people who frequented the cafe over the decades. We can compile a dossier proving that our intention is precisely to preserve and value this history." "And I can help!" exclaimed Leo, maneuvering his chair to his tablet. "I was working on something. Look!" On the screen, an amateur documentary showed interviews that Leo had conducted with old cafe customers. They were touching testimonials about significant encounters, important decisions made there, moments of joy and comfort shared between those old walls. "When did you do this?" asked Victor, impressed. "In the last few weeks," replied Leo, blushing slightly. "Adam taught me some interview techniques, and Martha introduced me to the oldest customers." Emily observed how Victor looked at his sons with a mixture of pride and admiration. It was amazing how Leo and Adam had grown close, sharing knowledge and interests, building a relationship that overcame years of distance. "There's one more thing," continued Leo, switching to another file on his tablet. "I found records that the cafe served as a meeting point for artists and intellectuals during the military dictatorship. It was one of the few places where they could gather safely." "And how did you discover this?" asked Adam, genuinely curious. "In the diary of the former owner," replied Leo. "Martha helped me translate some parts that were in Italian." Victor stood up, a new energy in his movements. "This is exactly what we need. We won't just defend the cafe. We'll prove that it deserves to be preserved and expanded." "I can use my contacts in the press," offered Adam. "Not to attack, but to tell this story. To show how the Sunrise Project is a natural evolution of the cafe's social vocation." Emily smiled, remembering something. "You know what this reminds me of? The story Leo invented about that Art Deco building on our first day together. About how some places have the power to keep and transform stories. And create new ones," completed Leo, smiling at her. Martha, who was observing everything with her wise eyes, began to serve the coffee. The familiar aroma filled the room, bringing with it a sense of comfort and determination. "When my grandfather opened this cafe," she said, her voice loaded with memories, "he used to say that he wasn't just serving drinks, he was creating a piece of home for those who needed it. I think that's what you're doing now, expanding that home." Victor picked up his cup, observing the dark liquid for a moment. "You know, Leo," he said softly, "before I thought that leaving a legacy meant building the biggest business empire possible. Now I understand that true legacies are built from moments like this, from connections, from purpose." Leo's documentary went viral on social media within hours. What had begun as a personal project to record Sunrise Cafe's memories became a viral phenomenon, touching hearts far beyond the streets of New York. "More than 100,000 shares," announced Adam, checking the statistics on his notebook. "And the comments. You need to see the comments, Dad." Victor leaned over to see the screen, where hundreds of messages were accumulating, people sharing their own memories of the cafe, stories of important encounters, turning points in their lives that happened between those old walls. "There's even a 92-year-old lady," continued Adam, moved. "She tells how she met her husband here in 1950, when the cafe was one of the few places that accepted women entering unaccompanied." Emily, who was helping Leo organize more material for a second part of the documentary, smiled at seeing the glow in the boy's eyes. He had found his voice, his unique way of contributing to the project. "Em," called Leo, showing her a particularly interesting photo. "Look, what I found in the archives Martha brought." The photograph, yellowed by time, showed a young waitress serving coffee to a child in a wheelchair, the same one they had discovered before, but now there was more context. On the back, an annotation revealed that the waitress was Martha herself decades ago, and the child was her younger brother. "That's why she always had improvised ramps," murmured Emily, the pieces fitting together, "even before it was mandatory. And that's why she understands me so well," completed Leo, his voice soft. "She knows how important it is to feel welcome." Victor, who had approached to see the photo, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. These moments of physical contact, once so rare between them, now flowed naturally. "You know, son," he said, "when you ran away on that stormy night, I thought I'd completely failed as a father. But now I see that it was the universe giving us a second chance." "Third," corrected Adam with a gentle smile. "Don't forget that I was your first chance to get it right as a father." The comment, which weeks ago could have caused tension, now provoked laughter. Bitterness was giving way to a new type of understanding between father and sons. "The most amazing thing," observed Emily, "is how everything connects. The cafe has always been a place of encounters, of new beginnings. Now it's helping us rewrite our own story." "And not just ours," added Leo, pointing to his tablet. "Look at the new testimonials that have arrived." On the screen, a sequence of videos showed people of all ages and backgrounds sharing their connections with Sunrise Cafe. An older gentleman told how the place welcomed him when he lost everything in the economic crisis of the 80s. A young artist reported how she developed her first exhibition on the walls of the cafe. A group of students described how the space had become their refuge during exam periods. "That's it!" exclaimed Adam suddenly. "That's exactly what we needed to face the embargo." "What do you mean?" asked Victor. "It's not just about preserving a historic building," explained Adam, his eyes shining with the excitement of a journalist who found his big story. "It's about preserving a living heritage in constant evolution." The Sunrise Project isn't a break with the cafe's past, it's its natural evolution. Martha, who had entered silently with a new round of coffee, smiled upon hearing Adam's words. "My grandfather always said that a good coffee is like a good story. It needs time to develop its true flavor." Leo carefully picked up his cup, a habit he had learned from Martha. "And our story is still being written, isn't it?" "Yes," replied Emily, observing the family gathered, so different from that stormy night. "And this time, we're writing together." The hearing to discuss the Sunrise Cafe embargo had been scheduled for a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Constantine Global's lawyers disguised under the name of a historical preservation association. On the other, the United Donovan family, accompanied by Emily and an unexpected surprise. "Mary Claire!" Victor's voice faltered when he saw his ex-companion entering the courtroom. She was even more elegant than in his memories, her grey hair enhancing her mature beauty. "Adam told me everything," she explained, her accent still present after so many years. "I couldn't stay out of something so important for our family." Leo observed with fascination the woman who, he now knew, was his brother's mother. There were traces of Adam in her, the same gentle smile, the same expressive eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell," Victor corrected himself, noticing the ring on her finger. "Mary Claire still works," she smiled. "We're all here for the same reason, aren't we? To preserve something special." Before they could continue the conversation, the judge entered the room. The hearing was about to begin when Leo whispered something to Emily, who nodded and signaled to Victor. "Your Honor," Victor stood up. "Before we begin the formal procedures, my son would like to present something." The judge, a gentleman with a severe expression but gentle eyes, adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." Leo maneuvered his chair to the front of the room, his tablet connected to the projection system. On the screen, his documentary began to be shown, but it was no longer just the original project. New stories had been added, including touching testimonials from people whose lives were transformed by Sunrise Cafe. "This place," began Leo, his voice clear and confident, "isn't just an old building. It's a living piece of New York's history. And now we want to ensure it continues to be a space of transformation for future generations." The images succeeded one another. Old photos merged with future projects, stories from the past, dialogued with dreams for tomorrow. The court watched. In respectful silence, even the opposition's lawyers seemed touched. "The Sunrise Project," continued Leo, "won't destroy Sunrise Cafe, it will expand its original mission. Because you know what we discovered? That from the beginning, this place has always been more than a cafe. It was a refuge, a meeting point, a space of possibilities." Mary Claire, sitting next to Adam, discreetly held her son's hand. Victor noticed the gesture, and for the first time felt no jealousy or regret, only gratitude for all the paths that had brought them there. "Your Honor," it was Emily who was speaking now, standing up next to Leo. "What we propose isn't just a physical renovation. It's a commitment to accessibility, to inclusion, to the preservation of memories and the creation of new stories." The judge removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. "Young man," he addressed Leo, "you said you discovered something about the cafe. What else did you learn during this process?" Leo smiled, looking at his gathered family. "We learned that sometimes we need to lose our way to find the right path, that families can have many different forms, and that some places have the power to heal wounds we didn't even know we had." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Martha, sitting in the first row, was discreetly wiping her eyes with her apron. "And you know what else?" continued Leo, his voice loaded with contained emotion. "That stormy night when I took shelter in the cafe, it wasn't coincidence. Now I understand it was the beginning of something bigger than all of us." Victor observed his younger son with admiration. When had he become so articulate, so self-assured? The frightened boy from the rainy night had transformed into a young man capable of touching hearts and changing perspectives. Mary Claire leaned forward, whispering to Adam, "He has your gift with words, mon cher, and father's strong heart." Constantine. Global's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. It was evident they weren't prepared to face not only legal arguments, but a story of transformation and family unity. The judge's decision was unanimously favorable to the Sunrise Project. The embargo was lifted with the condition that historical elements of the cafe be preserved, a requirement that was already part of the original plans. Upon leaving the courthouse, the expanded family gathered at Sunrise Cafe itself to celebrate. "This deserves something special," announced Martha, disappearing into the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned with a tray carrying cups of the famous hot chocolate, the secret recipe that had won Leo over that first night. "Before we drink," said Victor, raising his cup, "I'd like to make an announcement. Mary Claire, your presence today made me realize something important." Everyone turned to him, curious. Victor continued, "The Sunrise Project can't be just about preserving the past. It needs to be about building bridges to the future. That's why I'd like to propose a partnership with your art gallery in Provence." Mary Claire raised her eyebrows, surprised. "What do you mean?" "A cultural exchange program," he explained. "Brazilian artists exhibiting in France, French artists bringing their works here. We can create a cultural corridor between the two countries, starting with Sunrise Cafe and your gallery." Adam smiled, understanding the deeper meaning of the proposal. It wasn't just a business project. It was a way to recognize and value all parts of their family history. "J'adorerais," replied Mary Claire, her eyes shining. "I've always believed that art has the power to unite people, to transcend borders." "Like coffee," exclaimed Leo. "Remember what Martha always says? That a good cup of coffee is a universal language." Emily observed the scene with a full heart. How much had changed since that stormy night? Sunrise Cafe, which had been her refuge when she herself was lost, was now transforming into a beacon of possibilities for so many other people. "M," called Leo. "Using the nickname that had become so special, you'll continue coordinating the project, won't you?" "Actually," intervened Victor, "I have another proposal for Emily." He paused, exchanging a significant look with his sons. "I'd like you to take on the general direction of the Sunrise Cultural Center, not just the construction project, but all future management." Emily felt her cup tremble slightly. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," encouraged Adam. "No one understands the spirit of this place better than you. And you're already part of the family," completed Leo, his touching sincerity making everyone smile. Mary Claire, who was observing Emily with interest, added, "Sometimes the best leaders are those who understand the value of simple stories, of true connections." "How did you know that night," Victor addressed Emily, "that my son needed more than shelter from the rain? How did you know exactly what to do, what to say?" Emily looked at her cup of hot chocolate, remembering that night that now seemed so distant. "I didn't know," she admitted. "I just followed my heart. Sometimes that's all we can do." "And that's exactly why you're the right person to lead this project," concluded Victor. "Because you understand that some decisions need to come from the heart, not just from reason." Martha, who had listened to everything in silence, finally spoke. You know what my grandfather used to say? That a real cafe needs three things: good beans, water at the right temperature, and most importantly, someone who knows that each cup tells a different story. Leo picked up his tablet, already imagining new possibilities. We can create a digital space too, a place where people can share their stories, connect, and document everything, completed Adam, the journalist in him already planning. Create a living archive in constant growth. Mary Claire smiled, observing her two sons interacting so naturally. La vie est étrange, n'est-ce pas? She murmured to Victor. Sometimes we need to take a very long detour to arrive where we should be. The following months were of intense transformation, not just for Sunrise Cafe, but for everyone involved. The works progressed at a steady pace, always respecting the historical structure of the place. Each peeling wall revealed new stories, each renovation brought unexpected possibilities. On a particularly busy afternoon, Emily was supervising the installation of the new access ramps when she noticed something interesting. Under several layers of paint, old paintings were emerging on the walls. They were delicate murals depicting scenes of old New York. "This is incredible," exclaimed Leo, who followed everything closely, documenting each discovery on his tablet. "We can preserve and incorporate them into the project." Adam, who was photographing the process for a special he was preparing, approached to better examine the murals. "They seem to be from the 1940s, he observed. "Look at the clothing of the people depicted." Victor, who had just arrived from a meeting, joined the group. In the last few months, he had visibly changed. The rigid posture had given way to a more relaxed presence, the impeccable suit often replaced by more casual clothes when he visited. "The works. You know what this reminds me of?" he commented, observing the murals. "That story you told, Leo, about how some places keep memories in the walls. It seems you were more right than we imagined." Martha, who was passing with a tray of coffee for the workers, stopped to admire the paintings. "My grandfather always talked about these murals," she said, moved. "They were made by an Italian artist who frequented the cafe. We thought they had been lost forever." "Nothing is truly lost," reflected Emily. "It just waits for the right moment to be rediscovered." The phrase hung in the air, loaded with meanings for all present. Victor exchanged a significant look with Adam, remembering the recent trip they had taken together to France to visit Mary Claire and get to know her gallery. "Speaking of rediscoveries," said Adam, picking up his notebook, "I want to show you something. It's a parallel project I've been developing." On the screen appeared a beautifully designed website, Sunrise Memories, a living archive. It was an interactive platform where people could share their stories related to the cafe, with photos, videos, and testimonials. "The idea is that it be more than a simple website," he explained. "It will be a space of connection where the past and present can continuously dialogue." Leo, who was already exploring the site with enthusiasm, exclaimed, "Look, there's a special section for accessibility stories. We can use this to show how the cafe has always been an inclusive place, even before laws existed." "And there's more," continued Adam. "Mary Claire suggested we create a virtual gallery connecting artists from both countries. She's already begun cataloguing works in Provence, that dialogue with our history here." Victor smiled upon hearing his ex-companion's name. The old hurt had been replaced by a new type of understanding and respect. "She always had a special eye for unlikely connections," he commented. "Like you in the cafe," observed Leo, addressing his father. "Who would have imagined that such a formal businessman would end up falling in love with a place like this?" "And who would have imagined," added Emily, "that a stormy night would change so many lives?" Martha, who had returned with more coffee, raised her cup in a silent toast. "You know what this proves? That my grandfather was right when he said that a cafe isn't made just of walls and furniture, but of the stories it keeps and the lives it transforms." Outside, the sound of the works continued. Hammers, saws, voices of workers. But inside, the cafe at that specific moment, there was a special peace. It was as if the place itself was breathing, renewing itself without losing its essence. "Sometimes I think," said Leo, distractedly scribbling in his drawing pad, "that the cafe is like those ancient trees in the park. Even when it goes through pruning and changes, its roots remain firm, nourishing new growth. Victor approached his son, observing the drawing taking shape under his fingers. It was Sunrise Cafe, but not as it was, nor as it would be. It was a vision that merged past and future, memory and possibility. On the eve of the inauguration of the new Sunrise Cultural Center, the group gathered for an intimate moment at the cafe. The works were practically completed, the last details being finalized for the big day. The space was unrecognizable and at the same time strangely familiar. "It's amazing how we managed to maintain the soul of the place," commented Emily, running her hand over the restored counter. The marks of decades of use had been preserved, silently telling their own stories. Leo traveled through the new spaces in his wheelchair, testing each ramp, each access. His face shone with satisfaction at seeing how his ideas had materialized. "Look," he called, stopping in front of a special wall. The wall of stories turned out exactly as we imagined. The wall, which was previously hidden under layers of paint, now displayed a mosaic of photographs, documents, and art. In the center, the restored original mural blended with contemporary contributions, creating a visual dialogue between past and present. "Mary Claire would be proud," said Adam, photographing the details. "She always said that true art is that which connects times and people. And she'll see it personally tomorrow," reminded Victor. "Her flight arrives early in the morning." Martha emerged from the kitchen carrying a special tray. "I thought the occasion deserved something different," she smiled. On the tray, cups of traditional hot chocolate mixed with the house's special coffee. "A fusion of the old with the new," observed Emily, taking a cup. "Like everything here." Leo had paused his drawing for a moment, observing the gathered group. "You know what's coolest? How each of us brought something different to this place. Martha with her recipes and stories, Em with her care for people, Dad with his business vision, and you," completed Adam, "with your ability to see possibilities where others see limitations." Victor approached his sons, one on each side. He no longer needed words to express his love. It was there in the small gestures, in the shared looks, in the constant presence that was once so lacking. "Tomorrow," he said, "when the doors open, it won't just be a new cultural space being born. It will be the continuation of all the stories this place has kept, and the beginning of many others." Emily observed the scene with a full heart. How much had changed since that stormy night? The fear that once paralyzed her, the painful memories she carried, everything had been transformed into something new, something meaningful. "There's something I've been keeping," said Leo suddenly, maneuvering his chair to his backpack. From inside it, he took a yellowed envelope. "I found it in the cafe's old archives, but I was waiting for the right moment to show it." Everyone approached curiously. In the envelope, an old photograph showed Sunrise Cafe on its first day of operation. In the image, a diverse group of people smiled at the camera. Italian immigrants, American families, workers and intellectuals, all sharing the same space. "Look at the date," pointed Leo. It was exactly 85 years before the day of the inauguration of the new cultural center. "It's not a coincidence," murmured Martha. "Some stories are written long before they happen." The group remained silent for a moment, each absorbing the meaning of that discovery. Outside, New York continued its frantic rhythm, but inside the cafe, time seemed to flow differently. "So," said Adam, raising his cup. "A toast?" "To Sunrise Cafe," began Victor. "To new stories," added Emily. "To family," completed Leo, his smile illuminating the environment. "To all that," concluded Martha, "and to what is yet to come." The cups clinked softly, the sound echoing off the walls that had witnessed so many other celebrations over the decades. On the wall of stories, the images seemed to come alive under the light of the setting sun, as if all those who had passed through there were somehow present at that moment. The day of the inauguration of the Sunrise Cultural Center dawned with a bright sun, as if New York also wanted to celebrate the moment. A line formed on the sidewalk long before the scheduled opening time. People of all ages, some who had known the cafe for decades, others attracted by the stories they had seen online. Mary Claire arrived early, bringing with her a contagious energy. and a special selection of works by French artists for the first exhibition of the Space. When she saw Leo for the first time, her eyes filled with tears. He had so much of Adam in his smile, so much of Victor in his determined look. "Mon petit," she hugged the boy, "your drawings are magnifiques. We need to organize an exhibition. Of yours in Provence." Leo blushed with pleasure while Adam smiled, observing the interaction between his brother and his mother. It was as if a circle was finally closing, a family finding its unique way of being complete. Emily was supervising the last preparations when she noticed Victor standing in front of the wall of stories, absorbed in thoughts. "Nervous?" she asked, approaching. "Moved," he corrected. "Look at all this. Who would have thought that a stormy night would change so many lives?" Martha, impeccable in her new uniform, specially designed for the occasion, began to serve the special breakfast for the guests. The familiar aroma of coffee now mixed with new aromas. Fresh bread from the school bakery that would operate on the premises, flowers from the hanging gardens designed by Leo. "It's time," announced Adam, checking his watch. Victor positioned himself in front of the main doors, his sons at his side. Mary Claire and Emily completed the group, each representing an essential part of the transformation that had occurred there. "Before we open," said Victor, his voice loaded with emotion, "I want to thank each one of you. This place is not just her cultural center. It's a testament to the power of change, of love, of family in all its forms." Leo, who was holding the scissors for cutting the ribbon, added, "And it's just the beginning. We have so many plans, so many stories still to tell." The doors opened and the public began to enter. The looks of admiration, the exclamations of surprise, the smiles of recognition, everything confirmed that they had succeeded. Sunrise Cafe had transformed without losing its essence. In the Eye, new multi-purpose space, a photographic exhibition told the story of the cafe, from its early days to the current transformation. In a special corner, Leo's tablet displayed in a loop his documentary, now with a new ending showing the inauguration. Mary Claire, observing everything with an artist's eyes, commented, "You've created more than a cultural space. You've created a place where stories can continue to grow." "Like a family," completed Adam, hugging his younger brother. Emily, who had stepped away for a moment to observe the scene, felt a deep peace. Her own painful past had been transformed into something beautiful, into a capacity to help others find their way. Martha approached her, carrying 2 cups of the special hot chocolate. "You know what my grandfather used to say," smiled the lady, "that some stories are like coffee. They need the right time to reach their perfect point." Outside, New York continued its frantic rhythm, but inside the Sunrise Cultural Center, time seemed to flow differently. The old walls, silent witnesses to so many stories, now embraced new possibilities, new dreams, new beginnings. And so, Sunrise Cafe was reborn, not just as a physical space, but as a living symbol of transformation and hope. A place where past and future met to dance, where families reconnected, where stories continued to be written one cup of coffee at a time.